My name is Elizabeth Allyson Crawford, or Zelle for short, and I'm your host for this episode of Hummingbird, a community education podcast where we capture conversations that bolster our understanding of ourselves, of others, and of our communities. Personally, I'm a teacher, a dancer, and some other things, but most importantly, I'm a child development specialist with a focus on intergenerational well-being. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to my friend Bill Walczak, a community leader, public health advocate, and educator in Dorchester, Massachusetts, just outside of my hometown of Boston. At the end of my extensive conversation with Bill this year, we wrapped up with a discussion about the future of Boston, persistent challenges with low voter turnout, and the city's unique, strong mayor system. As U.S. elections approach, we're pre-launching this community education podcast with a special outro that serves as a timely reminder for the importance of good governance and of our collective civic engagement. I enjoyed hearing about the real role of Boston's mayor from Bill, and I hope that you will too. Please don't forget to vote, not only in this upcoming national election cycle, but as the norm in your community. Thanks so much for listening. The full version of Episode 1 with Bill is coming soon. Stay tuned in general at Evolution Forward on Instagram or online at www.evolutionforward.org. So, we're on Boston mayors. You mentioned Michelle Wu, new cycle coming up. I know last time you were very unhappy with voter turnout.
Oh, it's horrible.
What's your call to action around this next mayoral cycle?
I actually did run, and what's today? Thursday? So on Monday, I got reelected as president of the Columbia Savin Civic Association. So
congratulations!
Of course, I was the only candidate. So
it's a big job.
It was like the old Soviet system. But anyway, it's a good neighborhood from the perspective as people. A lot of activists here, and there's a lot of really smart activists here too. But in any case, I really want to introduce things through civic associations because, sometimes our elected officials have other agendas, right?
Yep.
So when I wrote a piece before the last mayoral election, which was Wu versus Anissa Sabi-George, as saying that we needed to get rid of the municipal election year and just have all the elections in the even-numbered years. Because there's twice as many people who vote in even-number years as in odd-number years. Twice as many, because there's, the Senate, the president, all that stuff is in those years. And I asked Michelle Wu and Anissa Sabi-George if they would be in favor of that in order to increase the turnout, because the turnout, even for a mayoral election, is like around 30%. And I calculated like 400,000 people didn't vote in this election. This enormous number of people didn't vote. And anyway, and they both said no, not interested. So,
changing election cycles, not a simple thing, huh?
It's people know how to get elected when there's a turnout of X number, and they don't know what would happen if all of a sudden
if there were real
twice as many
representation.
People, or had twice as many people voting.
Yeah,
right. So that's obviously a problem for incumbent people. Incumbent elected people have an understanding of where their votes come from, and messing with that is problematic for people, for elected officials. On the other hand, from the perspective of democracy, it would be nice if we had 60% of the people showing up rather than 30% or even less.
Yeah.
In non-mayoral election years, the turnout can be between 7 and 15%.
Okay.
The last time an incumbent mayor of Boston lost an election, the last time, 1949, James Michael Curley was mayor of Boston. He had just come back from Danbury Federal Penitentiary for fraud. I think it was mail fraud or something like that during World War II.
Oh, Boston.
He had served part of his term. Johnny Hines, it's a longer story, but Johnny Hines wound up becoming the interim mayor while he was serving his term in prison. And the promise was, and actually Tip O'Neill had something to do with this. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the Massachusetts House at the time and had to work a deal with Governor Bradford, one of the old Yankee governors that was here, because at the time, if you were sent to prison or died or whatever, the head of the president of the city council became mayor.
Okay.
But the president of the city council was also being sent to prison for a completely different thing. And so they didn't have a third person. Now they have the city clerk. But at the time, Johnny Hines was city clerk. And so they had to work a deal because Johnny Hines said, I'll do the interim mayor as long as I can go back to being city clerk. So they worked that deal, it passes through the legislature, crisis averted. All of a sudden, Mayor Curley, or James Michael Curley, gets released from prison on a compassionate thing from President Truman, based on the fact that James Michael Curley was dying of cancer. He had cancer, blah, 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 right? So he gets released from prison, and on the drive back to Boston has a miracle cure. No cancer anymore.
I see.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So it was like, wow, he's cured. Wow, all it took was that drive from Danbury Prison. So he comes back in and goes back into City Hall and comes out after 5 hours, and he had been in prison for 5 months. And he says to the media that's there, I've accomplished more in the past 5 hours than has been accomplished in the past 5 months. Thereby insulting the hell out of Johnny Hines. Johnny Hines goes home, and I know his son is still alive, Barry Hines, and he starts cussing, using the F word and stuff like that, stuff they'd never heard out of his mouth before. I'm going to kill the bastard, I'm going to, whatever. And he decides to run, and he runs against James Michael Curley and wins the election. It's memorialized in the book The Last Hurrah, which became a movie with Spencer Tracy in it, and although he's Skeffington in there. And that's the last time an incumbent mayor of Boston lost.
And that is a really scary fact.
Exactly. The mayor of Boston is so powerful.
I'm going to go out on this one because I don't think, even as someone born and raised in Boston, I would not have understood all of these things if I hadn't had these conversations with you and
really
read your writing and stayed in touch, because I think I'm going to admit this as a human, that we learn from each other in a really powerful way.
Yeah.
So
the reason why that's the case, the mayor of Boston is called the strong mayor system, right? There's actually a type of system for governance that Boston adopted. It's a strong mayor system, meaning the mayor has virtually all the power. City council has very, very little power. And as a result,
that's what I'm referring to.
Mayor,
strong mayor system.
Right.
Okay.
The mayor, therefore, if you're going after an incumbent mayor, you're not going to raise money, because nobody is going to give you money, and then you lose, and then they're out for 4 years. They get nothing out of City Hall.
It's a fundraising problem. It's a fundraising problem, right? And the only reason Marty Walsh left is because he moved into another role, right?
Yeah,
and that
secretary.
shook up Boston in kind of an interesting way.
All of a sudden, there was no incumbent.
Yeah, and now the nerds like you and I are wondering: is Boston gonna what pathway is Boston gonna proceed on in terms of the role of the mayor, which has such a big fingerprint on what happens here? But it's interesting.
Yep. Michelle is, it's really interesting. She's kind of alienated the development community and then has tried to kind of pull herself back into the development community. The development community is what funds Boston elections.
This is the linchpin, is the real estate, which goes back to what we talked about from the beginning, is how you get stuff done in a building in Boston.
Exactly. You hire the right lawyers and you make the right kind of contributions to the incumbent people, and you usually get what you want.
Or for me, I just call Bill Walczak and say, can you handle this? And the answer is yes. So, well, anyway,
Any good cause.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop this recording, but I'm just going to say thank you to anyone who stayed with us, and I hope you found something nectar-like, hummingbird nectar in it. I think so, about so many things. So I'm going to pin some of the people in the articles that you mentioned and put a little resource together. But thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing everything, Bill.
My pleasure.